All right, we're back. It is COMP1004. That's Rapid Application Development here at Georgian, and it's the fall 2016 semester. It's week 6, part 1 of our broadcast. And what we're really talking about today is a few things, like we said in my intro. I'm going to talk about do a little bit of a review of what's going to be on the exam. All right, so we're going to talk about that. I'm also going to be talking about assignment number 3, which is going to be due on the week you get back from break. So right now we're sitting at week 6. And as an example, right? So here's week 6 of our lovely course, right? So week 6, we're still doing C# Essentials. We've been doing that for the last few weeks. All we're doing is, and at the same time, we're learning about Windows forms and different controls that we can put on Windows forms. That's what we've been doing. So up until now, you've had 2 assignments, right? The first one that you guys had was, I think I gave it to you in week 2, was the mail order. That was the first one. The second one, which you guys are almost finished and should be done by tomorrow night, is the Auto Center, right? And again, I've seen some of your work. I think it's pretty good. And then this is the third one, which is the Movie Bonanza, right? So where you're going to be simulating an online streaming service, right? So again, it's all practice with Windows forms over and over again, the same kind of stuff with additional features. So I'm asking you to do, let's say, a menu, or there might be some, in this particular case, a drop-down list. We're going to be focusing on those things starting today, right? So at the same time that I've given you these assignments, the assignments are there to prepare you for the exams. There's 2 exams in this course. There's the midterm and the final exam, or test, if you will, right? So everything you've done to date should have been enough, especially the demos we've done in class, to prepare you for the exam, or test, if you will, that's going to happen next week, right? Please come on time. Please come early, right? Because next week we have 3 hours, and again, there's going to be a build. You're going to have a practical piece to your exam, build something, and there'll be a small piece where you do true, false, multiple choice. Won't be that many questions, and it'll be based on the stuff we've done in class. All right. Again, I can't go back and refer to the book too much because a lot of the stuff we've done in the book is just, if I've talked about the book, if I've talked about it during class on a PowerPoint, for example, Gabe, you asked, should I look at my PowerPoints? Well, the one we did on generics last week, when we talked about things like lists and all that stuff, that's a good thing that I'll probably ask you questions around, right? Because we focus specifically on syntax for lists and generics, right? So you should know about that. And we did our first kind of list last week as well. So those kind of things I'm going to ask you questions around. Is it going to be complex programming type questions? Probably not, right? I'm going to ask you some basic questions right now. As we get to through this course, and as it's going to start ramping a little bit more, and you're going to see they're going to get more complex as we get towards the end. Remember that this course, if it was aligned properly, and again we're changing stuff up with Rich and Jarrett and everybody else, is what we're trying to do is align this course. So this should come before Comp 2007. That's the way it should work, right? So you do this course, you do Windows forms, and then you do web forms, right? Which is kind of a progression. Okay, so let's talk about assignment 3 before we get into the review, right? So what are you building with this one? And is it much different than it was before? So again, we're sitting at week 6 right now, and this will be due week 8. Now remember that next week is exam week, and you'll have a week off for reading week after that, right? So the week of the 24th to the 27th, you guys are off. And then when we come back, this will be due on the Friday of the week we come back. So this will be like Friday, November the 4th. Now, so truly, even though it's like, it's 3 weeks from now, it's kind of a 2-week assignment, and it's not that much more difficult than the stuff you've been already given, right? It's just building on the stuff that we've already seen. So what's different about this assignment than the others? It's a multi-form assignment. This is the first one where it's required, where you have multiple forms that you're doing, and each form kind of feeds data into the other form. Okay? So what is it going to look like before I get into the down details? First of all, it's a movie application, right? So you have some movies. I've given you some examples, by the way. Do they have to be these movies? No. I'm just giving you an example of a movie list. So here's our movie list, from a few years ago. And here's some categories. And imagine that Netflix didn't exist, right? And you were renting the movie in a streaming service online somehow, right? This is the idea. And you'd have to pay for per movie as opposed to per month, right? like we used to do back in the day when we had Blockbuster. Remember those days? Some people might remember. Anyway, so here's some example of some costs for different movies depending on the category. So you have two parts here. One is the movie title and the category, and then depending on the category, what's the cost, right? So you have to kind of link those two things together, right? You'll have a little bit of a menu to do, right? And in the menu, it'll help you do things like stream or print or cancel. And we'll talk about the printing function and what I'm expecting from that. It's going to be slightly different than what it says in here. And the about function, you have to, we're going to talk about this about box again a little bit more carefully. And we've kind of done this stuff already. So what is it going to look like at the end? It's going to look like this, right? So you have your current movies, let's say. And by the way, when I show you this stuff, what's the rule? This is the minimum requirements. So if it looks like this, I've just given you examples of what it could look like. Do I want you to all make it this way? Remember that, yes, I mean, this would satisfy requirements, but if you made it a little bit fancier than this, it looks nicer, all the power. I'll give you bonus points for UI creation, right? So again, you have your movie here. Let's say you select a movie like Death Race 2. Then your selection would come up here, and an image of your selection would come up here. The title would fill in, the category, and the cost, right? Depending on what you've chosen from on this side, from your drop-down list. Once you've chosen the movie, the next button becomes enabled, and when you click the next button, it takes you to the order form. So what's happening now is you're getting data from this, and you're passing it into this form. And remember, we talked about that. What's the best way to pass data from one form to the other that I've shown you with character generator? Okay, I'm going to start asking people. Create a class, right? Instead of, there's two ways actually. The one way is pass the baton, right? So I've got like two forms, and I just pass data. I pour data from one form into the other form, right? But there's a problem with that, right? Especially if I'm generating form 2. So this is form 1, select form. And then your order form, if this is generated from form 1, then what if I want to go back to form 1 and change my selection? What happens then, right? Well, you'd lose your data, right? If you have the back button, you'd have to go back and you lose your data, potentially. So that we want to avoid that, and the way to do that is to have a class that's in the middle. Now, I'm not forcing you to do that. I've offered that as a methodology for you to pass data from one form to the other. But you could very well use properties in one form or another to pass the data. So again, there's two methods. I pass the data through by pushing into the properties of the next form, right? You can do that. You can make them public, push them in there, and when they're done, you push them back, right? If you wanted to go back, navigate back. That's okay, but it's not the best method. The best method is to have a separate class, a container class that we're doing today with the D&D generator that we've been doing, and you fill the stuff into the class itself, and then it doesn't matter. The forms are just ways of navigating the data as opposed to the data is being navigated by the forms, right? So you pass it into this, however you want to do it, right? You pass the data in here. So you're going to re-show kind of a larger picture of a larger image of the movie, the category, the title, and so on. You'll be able to quote unquote print your selection. We'll talk about that. Pull up a help in your help menu. You'll be able to bring up an about box or whatever. This will calculate the totals. We've done a lot of calculations on the forms. Why? Because I'll tell you right now, a lot of the Windows forms we make in the real world have calculations and data on them, right? So you have to understand how to do this over and over again. You check the checkbox, and then it brings up, it adds the order in here. So the amount of money that you're going to get, that's going to add it in if you want to order the DVD, at the movie or stream the movie, but you're also going to order a DVD for $10. Right, kind of thing. It's going to add that on. And then you're going to click the stream button, and it's going to come and put up what this form says. Okay, thank you for choosing Movie Bonanza. Your movie will begin streaming shortly. Right, and then it would obviously the next step would be your browser window or something, or some other way of streaming your movie would happen. So it's a simulation, right? Your credit card will be charged whatever dollars you put in. So we're actually transferring the data, the grand total. We're transferring that grand total to the final form, right? And then your movie, whatever the movie is that you chose, in this case, Death Race 2, will begin streaming shortly, right? So that's really, in a nutshell, it's just multi-form applications. I want you to be able to handle sending data from one form to the other, right? That's really the exercise here. It's not so much the user interface at this point or because we've done the costs and calculations before. This is just making sure you guys understand costs and calculations a little bit more in detail. Any questions about this? Again, not a hard assignment. Also worth 10% of your final grade. So they're all worth 10, 10, 10, 10. It's not like one's harder than the other one right now at this point. It's just a matter of you practicing. Think about these as practice questions for your exam, right? That's what it is. I'm just giving you practice so that way you can do this stuff. If you look at the details of the assignment, there's nothing different here except for I've broken out in sections the stuff that you should know how to do. For example, selection form has its own section. Part 2, right? So it says create a splash screen. That's required now for this assignment, right? Add a drop-down list, use a group box, and I've told you specifically what to put in there and how it works. Order form, another section, right? Has its own marks associated with it, right? A menu strip, a cancel button, and so on. I've asked you to do certain things. Now, when I do this on 3F, where it says print menu selection, will display a print preview of the order form, okay? This is nice that I've asked you to do this, but it's way more difficult now in C# than it used to be, right? I'm just putting it out there. Before, we actually had a control. We just drag and drop, and you get a print preview. It's not exactly like that anymore. So what I would accept for this one, and I'm telling you this as something that I've left it in the way it is for a reason. If you make it work as a print preview, I'll give you a bonus for this one. This is one of a bonus opportunity. If you make it work, right? However, if you make it so that it pulls up a little form that says your movie will be printing shortly, or the order that will be printing shortly, I'll be okay. Like a message box will be fine with me, right? Why is that? Because how often do we print these days? On average, not very often, right? Because nowadays we just don't, I mean, we hardly print. If we're going to print something, it's going to print a confirmation or something like that, right? So, and printing, the whole idea of printing is we have to use the graphics object to print, believe it or not, right? If you really want to do a print and format a print page, and that's a topic of another day, right? Where we actually do a layout with graphics and everything else. So that's not part of what this thing is about. Remember, I wanted you just to practice multiform, which is what I really want to do. So for this part, for 3F, I'm just specifying for you guys to understand, right? That you don't really have to make a print preview. If you do, I'll give you a bonus, right? If you just make a message box that says your form, the order form is printing. Thank you very much for your order, that kind of thing. Fantastic. I'm good with that. Okay. About box, group boxes, text boxes, all the stuff that you've done before over and over again. It tells you what you need, but it doesn't tell you how you pass the data. I'm not going to say anywhere that you have to have this particular structure in your code to pass the data from form A to form B. I'm not going to tell you that because there's many ways to do the same thing, like I said, right? The stream form is the final form, if you will, right? And the idea here is what I want to do is if you close the button on the final form, it terminates the application, right? So you have to understand how to do all that stuff. From a solution structure perspective, I've told you how to name your forms as well as the same stuff that I saw last time. So basically, as long as you adhere to the basics that I've asked you to adhere to, you get your 3 marks. And then your internal documentation as normal, your author's name, student ID, and all that stuff should be on every C# file that you have. You should stamp that across all the files. GitHub as normal, that's a regular thing. So in terms of putting stuff on GitHub and you're using GitHub as a revision control system, not just a backup system, right? Hint, hint. When I get back on the 8th week with you, so after the exam, not next week, because next week's the exam week, but the week after, right? You're almost done. I'm going to check you, right? So when we come in on the Thursday, right? I'm going to say, so you guys should be almost done, right? Show me your stuff. And it'll be a check and X scenario again. So lab 2 or lab 3 or whatever it's going to be by then. I'll check to see if you're almost done. By then you should have UI. I'm going to check your user interface for each of the forms. That's what I want to see. I'm telling you in advance because that's what I'm going to ask for when we get back, right? So that's like week 8 I'm telling you about, right? I'm going to check the user interfaces for that week, as well as there should be some kind of basic functionality on the first form, because by then you should be almost done, right? If I don't see that by week 8, again, you would lose a couple marks, only from a progression perspective. I'm also going to check your GitHub at that time, right? So those are the 2 things. Your user interface and your GitHub should be pretty much updated for week 8. And then the same week, on the Friday, this thing will be due, right? Questions around assignment 3. Again, all I'm doing is I'm just expanding on the stuff we've talked about over and over again. So that way when you've had enough opportunity to practice the different concepts as we move from one concept to the other, right? And then remember that in the second half of semester, what we're going to be doing, mostly focusing on database, right? That's the and object-oriented programming techniques. There will be some PowerPoint presentations specifically from the book on OOP because we're covering about 4 chapters, right, for just on object-oriented programming techniques, things like delegates and indexers and other things that you probably wouldn't have seen in other courses. For example, it wouldn't be available in Java the same way. So those are new information, new stuff that you're going to be learning in the second half of semester. So that's coming up the first 3 weeks, and then there'll be like almost 4 weeks of database with entity framework for the last part of the course, right? So that's what's happening in the second half. So just expect that you're going to get assignments that are data-driven, right, and also more class-based. Is not like in that click event, right? It won't be as much about that. Okay, so that's what's happening. So assignment 3, it's doing a couple of weeks, I guess, equivalent, because I'm not really counting the reading week as a week, although I know some people would count that, right? So you see, you have actually 3 weeks, physical weeks, 3 calendar weeks, but I'm kind of thinking about this as a 2-week assignment, if you will. Okay. All right, so there's no questions. You guys are fantastic. I can see that you guys are lots of energy today. No questions about your assignment. You guys are going to be perfect, right? Kenzie, perfect? Perfect? Okay, no problem. Let's move away from this and get back to what we were doing last week. So if you guys go up on GitHub, and this is for Rich as well since he's visiting us today, if you want to follow along. And if we're looking at Georgian, last week we had lesson 5, right? It's right up there. We're just going to extend lesson 5. And we're going to create lesson 6 from lesson 5, right? Now, one of the things you need to know how to do on your exam is to make templates, right? So if I start off with a template, how do I create a template? I'm going to give you a kind of a template that you're going to use, but you're going to make your own exam submission template with it. How do we do that? So I invite you to go up on Visual Studio. So here I am with Visual Studio, and I'm going to pull up a my project. Right? Now, if you're someone who doesn't have this, like for example, you don't have it, you just download COMP1004 lesson 5 from GitHub, and you're good to go. You're way ahead of me. Thank you very much. But for those people who don't have it, you go here, I go to lesson 5, right? I'm pulling this up. And what I want to do here is I want to make a template from this one, right? So as I load up, and if I go to my Solution Explorer, you can see that I have all my forms. This is the wrong, I'm looking at the totally wrong thing, COMP1004. Let's try this again. I don't know what happened there. Let's open up that project. I'm looking at the wrong, I did click on the right thing. I just clicked on the wrong lesson. I don't know what happened there. Okay, let's try that again. So you're going to open up this one, and there we go. This is what it would look like. This is what we left off with last day, right? Now there's a visible thing that I kind of had done, right? We're going to get rid of that today. But if you grab this one, this is what you should see. So I'm going to make a template from this. How do I do a template? I'm going to go File. I'm going to Export Template. That's how we do it. And then it's Project Template that we're choosing. The project that we're choosing is COMP1004 F2016 Lesson 5, because remember, even though we have one solution, each solution can have multiple projects attached to it. Right now we only have one. Okay? I'm going to click Next. I'm going to accept the defaults and click Finish. And what this will do is we'll take our project and make it into a zip file and store it inside of our templates folder inside of our Visual Studio 2015 installation. And when it's done, it's going to pull up a File Explorer window like this, right? Telling you that it's all done. It'll show you the zip file. And then you can close your solution and then open up a new project, which is what we're going to do. So we're going to go New Project, right? And I'm going to click on Visual C#, but not Windows, just Visual C# itself, and then scroll down. And if you notice, I may have a template under COMP1004, and there it is. I'm going to choose this one, but obviously I'm not going to call it COMP1004 F2016 Lesson 5.1. it's going to be lesson 6. Here's what this thing will not do, right? It will not carry on the Git repository from the previous lesson. So that Git repository is separate. It's for lesson 5. This is the Git repository that we're going to have for lesson 6, right? So one thing to note is, because I've created this, I've kind of derived this lesson, this project for lesson 5, even though it looks identical. What I need to do is go and create a new GitHub link. And I'm going to do that here inside my Team Explorer. I'm going to click Getting Started, right? And I'm going to choose Georgian. And then notice it's going to just take on this form, COMP1004, which is completely wrong. I don't know why it says that. It should say actually COMP1004. I don't know how that worked out. And let me just check this out, because it freaks me out sometimes what happens. Yeah, it's really bizarre. COMP1004 F2016 lesson 6 is what it should say. And click Publish. There we go. Yay. Fantastic. So now I'm up to date, and if I was going to check GitHub to make sure that we're good, love it. There it is. That's just happened right now, right? And you can see that if I click in there, this is totally wrong, right? Because it's showing Contoso database. Hey, Rich, you like this one? Even my Visual Studio is COMP1004, and I got my ability form. It's actually doing the thing. I know it happens all the time with Visual Studio. So
command line, just run a remove.
I'm going to do it all. So yeah, so it happened before. It's happened to me many times. So what to do? How to fix this problem? This is great. I like having problems like this, because then we have a chance to fix them together. So what do you do? First of all, let's kill this repository, because it's completely wrong. So I'm going to go into, because you can't do anything about this. This is done. So I'm going to go to Settings, and I'm going to go scroll all the way down and delete this repository. And we're just going to put a copy of this repository right here into here and destroy. Bye. Okay, so that repository is gone. And now I got to fix my problem locally, because I've got this lesson, but it's linked to the wrong stuff for whatever reason. Okay, one thing to note is, if I click on the solution and I right-click onto it, left-click and then right-click, I can open the file in File Explorer, and I can also open it up in Command Line. Okay, if I go to default command line or PowerShell, depending on what I want, I can get the command syntax. So for here, as an example, if I do a directory command, I can see that I got a git ignore file, right? That's right here. And if I go up a step, right, I see all my stuff. Now, obviously, what I've done is I put it in the wrong folder, but that shouldn't make a difference. It doesn't matter at all, actually. So another way to do it is to kill the Git repository physically. And I'm telling you this so you don't lose any files, right? Because I know we had some instances of people losing files when they kill the Git repository, which is a bad thing. So what do? We open a file in File Explorer, and I've set mine up so I can see the Git folder. There's my Git folder, right? So again, I'm looking at all folders inside my COMP1004 Fall 2016 Lesson 6. I'm just killing this thing. There we go. I still have a Git attributes and Git ignore file, and I'll keep those in there. But I'll make a new initialize my Git repository and new right here. All right, so I'm in here. I'm in the folder, which is going to be COMP1004. And again, I've kind of showed you guys this before. There it is. So I'm going to clear. If I do a directory, this is my solution folder, and it says everything that's correct. But what I need to do is do everything by command line. So let's say git init, initialize my new Git repository. I'll say git add dot, which adds everything to the staging area. And then from there, I'll say git commit -m, and I'll say initial commit. Oh, if I can type properly. Okay, so it adds all this stuff for my lesson 6, minus anything that's in my git ignore file, into my repository. Yes? I'm not killing my assignment. I have a weird, my weird thing is happening right now, and it's not killing anything. Just bear with me while I do this, all right? So if I go clear, now what I want to do is that I've got everything added in there. I need to create that remote connection, right? So in order for me to get that information, I'm going to go and create a new repository here on GitHub. This is the way to fix it. So I'm going to go plus, I'm going to go new repository. I got to choose the right organization, right? So it's Georgian. And then in here, I'm going to name it properly. This is manual, right? So COMP1004. And that's fall 2016, and it's lesson 6. Okay. Once I've done this and I've created it, I've got the code, which is right here, these last 2 lines that I can edit. And if, in fact, if you create a Git repository on GitHub, right, you'll see all the code you need that I just kind of typed in, pretty much, git init. Instead of git add readme, I said git add dot, right? And I did this first commit or initial commit. So the only difference would be that change the git add readme to git add dot, and then it would add everything to your repository. So if you follow these steps, and again, you wouldn't need the echo, right? Then everything I've done is what you're going to see here. Now, one thing we haven't done yet is this remote add, which we're going to add the remote, which is GitHub. And then we haven't done a push from our local files to our files on the cloud, right? So those are the 2 things we need to do. So I can grab these or this, same thing, right? I'm going to grab these 2 things, copy them. I'm going to go over to our command prompt, right-click and paste, and then press enter. And what it's going to do is going to add the remote and then push everything up to my from origin to master.
Honestly, is the -u necessary? Because I know when I go git push origin master, it pushes everything that I've done at git dot add dot.
It's good for the first time. -u is unconditional. That's why they do it, right? So basically, what it does is it forces the push. I don't recommend using -u ever again. Like, don't use -u unless you really have to. It's just unconditional, right? So we do it for the first push, but after that, it's just push. Okay. If I was to go back and if I want to see if my repository is okay now, then I should see my ability generator, and we're good to go, right? Now, what about Visual Studio? Because I totally messed it up, right? If I go to Team Explorer, I can see that right here. I have a local repository, right, that shows COMP1004. But notice that it says offline. Offline. See that? There's my connection. If I click Manage My Connections, right? Again, you can see that I've got my repository, my Git repository I'm looking at right now, and it's focusing on this one, COMP1004 in bold, F2016 >6. This is a good sign. It means that I've got everything aligned properly. To check this, what I recommend when you have this kind of problem is make a small change and upload it to GitHub so you see if there's actually any kind of effect, right? Again, don't be upset about this kind of stuff that happens. It happens all the time because Visual Studio is not perfect. Even though it's the king of all IDEs, it doesn't mean that it won't fail. Let's make a small change. We're going to do that in our character.cs, yeah? .cs, and we don't have any comments in here, so let's add in a comment. So we're going to put in a comment. So I'm going to say something like a multi-line comment that's going to kind of put my name and all that stuff in there. I'm going to use 2 stars. So I can continue the multi-line comment, and so the name of the developer, right? Date, let's say, which will be October 13th today, if I'm not wrong, and then maybe my student ID. What I've actually put in there, so my student ID, whatever it's going to be, right? And let's say, for example, it was, I don't know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever my student ID would be, right? And so I've made a change. I'm going to save that change. Notice there's a little check mark next to the character. A red check mark means there's been a change, right? And if I go to Team Explorer, I notice that I have 1 change in my character.cs. This is good. This is all good sign for me, right? I'm going to say updated, character .cs. I could also say added some comments to character.cs, whatever. Commit all. And then here's the test. I'm going to go home. I'm going to go sync and then push. And if everything goes well, I shouldn't have an error here. And when I go back over here, and if I refresh, right, then I should see an additional commit. There's 2 commits now. There's one that I added my initial commit, and then my new commit. So this is all good. So now, magically, my Visual Studio is fixed, and it's pushing to the right repository and the right code too. Not some weird code that pushed to the wrong place. Questions about this fix? And again, you may have this problem again and again, depending on Visual Studio, if you're switching between different applications. For example, let's say you're working with using Visual Studio for Rich's class for COMP1068, right? Because you can. If you really want to, you can do Node. I wouldn't, I probably would use, I don't recommend it, right? I recommend WebStorm or Visual Studio Code or something lightweight like that. But what if you're really, dead set on using Visual Studio? You could. Sometimes you'll get this weird error because you're working on two different kinds of projects, right? Don't despair. It's all fixable through command line. I didn't mean to do that little lesson, but hey, it's there, right? We had to fix it, so it's a good lesson for you guys too. Okay, so where were we last week? And why are we doing this kind of stuff? First of all, I always start off with the PowerPoint presentations, and I want to talk about that first. So let's go back to the PowerPoint presentation just for a second, just to discuss it. Because the PowerPoints for this week talk about more skills for Windows forms and controls. But by the way, these two PowerPoints, we've done pretty much everything that's in them, and they're good reference. Okay, so let me talk about them already. So again, 53 slides, but most of these slides are things like, if I was to go through them, more types of controls, like radio buttons and different kinds of other controls. Pull down. These, kind of like a drop-down list we're going to be talking about today a little bit more when we create my second form for my character sheet. So far, we only have a generator that generates abilities. I want to generate a random class, or a random race for sure, and maybe a random class. Maybe if it's not random, if I just pull them down, that's fine too. So we're going to talk about that in our ability generator or our character sheet generator, right? So that's one. It also talks about things like special list box and combo box controls. We're going to talk about that today, which is kind of in line. So these are events that we can do. For example, selected index. The selected index changed event. Selected index would be a property, right, of our drop-down list, which we're going to be talking about today. Okay. So that's what's in the PowerPoint. And we also, because we've also talked about last week, we talked about generics. We talked about lists. Well, the same methodologies we used on lists last week are the same things we can use on drop-down lists and things like that this week. For example, if I have a list, a drop-down list, I can add to the drop-down list with my add method, right? Whatever the drop-down list is called. So let's say, for example, I call it my class drop-down list. If I go class drop-down list dot add, I can programmatically add a member or an item to the drop-down list right through code, right? Just like I would be able to access that with a standard list that we talked about last week. Yes. I can. The challenge with it is that it may kill my connection. I'll do it for you though, just because we all love each other in the room, right? So if it messes up, just saying, right? It's your fault, and then we'll have to deal with it together, right? And then the other thing is this: what you see and what I record are going to be totally different, right? Because I see this really weird, presentation view, and you'll see this. So I'm not sure what's being recorded right now, but just because you're asking, buddy, I'll do it just for you, right? Right? Yeah. So I mean, it doesn't give you that much bigger. And in fact, what I recommend is we don't do this, and I just make it really big, like do one of these, right? And that's just much easier. Same thing, right? So those are the controls. We have add, insert, remove, remove at. We talked about this last week. So if I want to clear a list, this clear command is exactly what we did with the list that we talked about last week. It'll just clear the entire list. It'll remove every item from the list. Remember the list? What's the difference between a list and a container? By the way, really good exam question. So I've got a list, and an array. I kind of said the answer already. I got a list and an array. What's the difference between a list and an array? We did this last week. Yes.
A list is flexible.
That's a good answer. That's one difference. What's another difference? An array, is it a container that's empty? No, a list is a container it's just an empty container at the beginning. It's like a big box, right? It's a real flexible box that you can add a bunch of items to, but in the beginning it's just an empty box, right? And when I add items to the list, it fills that box with items of the same data type. That's what I'm doing, which is very similar to an array, because an array is a matrix of data types that are in order, right? It's an ordered matrix, right? Whereas a list, you can think of it as almost like an unordered matrix, although there's an order to it. The way we add items in is the order of the matrix, right? As opposed to in an array, you have a fixed order and you have X number of slots that you can put data into, whereas a list, you have an unlimited number of slots. And I say unlimited in a very loose way because it really depends on memory, right? So we use these methods that are part of the list, and it's exactly the same as a drop-down. So when I do a drop-down or combo box, which you're going to see as a control we're going to add in today, and I'm going to talk about how to add those controls in, we have this capability of adding items dynamically to the combo box or list box through code. Okay, and the great thing about this is once you learn about lists and generics, when we get to the data portion of our course, which is at the end with link, use the exact same commands again to add things to the database and remove things from the database and all that kind of stuff, pretty much, as you'll see. So kind of learnings we can pass on. So I'm not going to go into this again because we did this last week. We kind of did the idea of like, here, I've got a string array of months, right, as an example. And how do I load this string array of months into the combo box? Well, why would I do a string array of months if I could do a list of months? That makes more sense, right? I do a list of string type, and then if instead of me doing a list of months, my list itself, which is the combo box, the expiration month, which is a list, all I'm doing is I'm adding items. I don't know why I'm stumbling today, of type month to the combo box. And what this does is it adds the entire array. That's why it's done this way to the combo box in one fell swoop, which is kind of cool, right? So the months array, including every item, will be added into the combo box automatically with one add command. So not only can you add one item, but you can add several at a time. Okay, so some stuff that we've seen before, but you're going to see more of, right? So again, a combo box is what they're talking about here. Let's talk about the combo box. Instead of me showing you and talking about it from a very high level, it's way better to do it, right? So let's do this together. So if I go back to my Solution Explorer, let's see what we've got up to date. We've got this character sheet, and it's really not a lot yet. We have this thing, and I added this in for Keith last week. Keith, I have to blame you, right?
That's okay.
Okay. So what this, if we click the roll abilities, it just generates abilities from 3 to 18, and we use the 4d6 method we talked about last week of taking 4 dice and dropping the lowest one. And we did that with a list as an example, right? Now, if I click off this thing here, I also did the toggle, so you can toggle this off and on. You may not have this because I may or may not have put it up on GitHub. It was just an example for Keith. Let's get rid of that thing because we don't need it. So I'm going to straighten myself out here and go back to my ability form. Here we go. All right, so I don't need this piece, so I can get rid of it. Just delete it. So delete. There we go. Okay, so we have this little ability form, and what I want to do is I want to click I want to have a next button. So once I have my abilities, when I click my next button, it's going to go to the new form that we're going to build, right? And then what we're going to do is we're going to pick down in a combo box or a drop-down list what our race or class is going to be. So remember, if you're a D&D person who's played D&D before, you have the option of picking your race. You can pick an elf, a dwarf, a human, halfling, and so on, right? I'm going to give you these things to put in, but you can pull them down, and whatever you choose will have a box. Our text box will take that information that you chose from the drop-down list, and will populate it into the box. So let's do that together. So first we need a next button. Let's do that first. So I'm going to go to my toolbox, and I'm going to grab a button control and drag it over. Now remember, because we've put our font, we set our font for the form itself. If I go to the form, the properties of the form, remember we put the properties of the form. I'm just going to undo this one. We set up the font to Lucida Sans 16 point. Then everything that we drop into the form becomes 16 point automatically, right? So we don't have to do that. The only thing we have to do for the button is expand it, just like we did last time, so that it fits, and that it matches up with the other button we have in here already. Okay, one thing we need to do is name this thing properly, and again, my recommendation is call it what it is, the next button. We type in next button, and then make it so that when the text for the button is next, I can actually wait for Visual Studio to do what it has to do for me. Next. There we go. So whenever we click the next button, it's going to take us to the next form. So first we have the rollability form. We're going to click the next button. The next form is going to come up. Do we need all this space over here? Probably not. I could probably realign the form a little bit. So I could probably do one of these, pull this a little bit closer. And we may have some other additional functionality here later on. For now, though, we can probably pull this a little bit tighter. There we go. And save. Okay, we don't have a next form to go to yet. So we want to make a new form. Okay, questions? can I somehow duplicate my form and make an identical copy of it, right? So I don't have to do all this work I've already done. What do I mean by that? I mean the actual layout of the form itself is a pain in the ass a little bit to kind of do again from scratch, right? That would be bad. So you guys had your first couple of assignments. Did you ever have a chance to do that kind of thing? Yes.
You would do that. Didn't you have leftover code, duplicate code from the previous one?
If you physically copied the entire form, yes. What, is there another way we could do it? Ooh, you're talking about visual inheritance, right? Yes, you can, but there are some challenges around this. Just putting it up there, right? I'm not saying you can't do it, and let's leave that till we come back from break, okay? Because that's a good time. I like your thinking, though, right? Any other way? How about what other things can we do? How about some of the guys who are quiet all the time? I want to ask you guys over there on that table over there. Tell me the, give me the magic. Any other way that you can think of to copy elements of one form onto the other one? I've done that with Gabe. I think Gabe, you and I did it together. What did I do, Gabe? You and I did stuff together. What did I do? Oh, you're going to answer. Go ahead. Okay, I'm talking about the UI though, right? Yes, Kenzie. Could use the template. What do you mean the template? I mean the one I just made right now? I'm not making a new project. I'm making just one new form. Copy and paste. That would work actually. Let's try it out, right? Believe it or not, right?
Can you
So
do one thing first that's bugging me?
Sure, man.
Let's make the buttons the same size.
It's hard. The only way you can do that is if you made this button bigger, right? Because it's so big. Roll. We can make this roll instead of roll abilities.
To show them using the format command, have you used that?
The
Click
format.
on the next button first.
Sorry. Let's undo this thing. So let's do what you're saying here.
Undo. Click next.
Uh-huh.
Then click roll ability.
Yep.
Click format.
Yep.
Make same size.
Yep. Width or height?
Both.
Yeah, you just lose the other one.
Oh,
The
sorry,
roll
we had to
abilities.
do it in reverse.
Okay.
So if you click them in reverse, sorry, I gave you the wrong order.
That's okay,
It will
man.
Then automatically.
So
make them the
this,
same.
and then format,
Make same size.
make same
If you have
size,
a bunch of
both.
controls, then you want to make sure. You can also align the spacing in between them, for example. To
Yes.
Make sure all the vertical spacing is the same between several rows.
There we go.
You can use that.
And we probably need a little bit more room to do that
Order
that
to
way.
do it in matters
That's true.
in terms of which one is the guide and which one is what size or aligned to it.
Okay, so we've aligned our buttons, and now I want to move on to the next form. I need a form, right? So the thing to do is, okay, without using visual inheritance, because I like your thinking, but let's leave that aside for a second, because that's a great idea with some issues, right? But let's talk about this next piece. So I want to do another one. So I'm going to right click, I'm going to add a new form, Windows form. Again, you can do it through here, the quick hit area here, or you can go to new item and add a new Windows form, whatever way you like to do it. We've done that several times now. All right, so here's my Windows form. It brings up the new item anyway, and we're going to call this, one is the ability form. Now we'll call this the race form. So race form. And we're talking fantastical races here, right? Okay, race form, we're going to need more room. We're going to make it a little bit bigger. What's the first thing we should do? And if actually, maybe we'll make it a little smaller for a second. What's the first thing we should do to the form so that way we make sure that things are aligned properly? Yes, anybody? Change the font, right? Because the font dictates the size of our form in the first place, right? It's the same visual style, right? So if I go to properties, remember, next week when I give you your exam, the first thing I want you to do is build your UI, right? So let's take a look. So first thing I want to do is build the same font for my form. And the font that I'm using, again, if you guys forgot, for my ability form is Lucida Sans 16 point, right? So let's go back and try that for my race form. So I'm going to go to my race form. I'm going to go to the font. Here it is. And I'm going to pull down. I'm going to open the font dialog box. I'm going to type in Lucida and Lucida Sans. And we're going to do 16 and press OK. Notice that it makes the form bigger automatically. Yes?
One thing I've noticed is that anytime you select 16, it's never 16. It's either, like I selected 16, mine's 15.75
Why do you think that is?
because it's black.
It's not pixels. That's why it's not. It's based on your screen resolution, your DPI,
Okay.
right? So mine's 16.2. Yours might be 15 point something. Okay, that's part one. Let's make sure the text doesn't say race form like the thing. It says race form, right? And let's also drag and drop any controls we think we need. Now, I know I'm going to have a button. I'm going to undo that for a second. I know I'm going to need a button that goes back, because we're going to do our next back button idea, right? So I'm going to grab this button here, copy it. I'm going to go to the new form, and then paste it. I got my button, right? Nice and easy. And it's formatted the exact same way, so it's not going to make Rich mad, right? So it's big enough. It's not.
Proper width.
It's the same size as every other button so far. These big ass buttons that we have, right? Which are too big, but it's okay for us. So if we go back, right? Our next button is now on this form, and the good thing about it is it's called next button, right? So if we wanted to make many forms, which we will, then we'd have another one. We can make two next buttons, right? For now, what I want to do is I want to call this next button the back button. Has the same visual style. Here's my back button. And the only thing we have to change is where it says next, we're going to say back. I'm also going to make sure that the form is aligned correctly so it can fit another button, right? So we're going to kind of make this a little bit bigger. And now we're going to go back to our first form, grab our next button again, copy it, and go back to the race form and paste. So we have both our next and our back buttons. Now they have no functionality, yes?
When they come with the other next button, or they are restricted to
What do you think?
the latter.
If I had a problem, it wouldn't display properly. It wouldn't run. It wouldn't build, right? If I had a problem. Okay.
Once you want to distinguish them, it would be better practice.
Why would you want to distinguish a next button between one form and another? I'm just saying.
You know, they have different functionality because the
But-
next button from the other form will go to this form, but this next button will go to yet another.
Right, but the functionality doesn't get copied over, just the UI, just the user interface. So the functionality is preserved, right? What I mean by that is, if we haven't programmed our next button anyway, but even if we do, and if we copied it over, it wouldn't copy the click event. It would just copy the button itself. So speaking of next buttons, for now, let's double click on the next button to see what we do. And I want you guys to help me create that next form, okay? How do I do that? So here's my next button. What code do I use? And by the way, this is, if I was going to test you on an exam if I wanted to make a show hide button, how do I do it? What are the steps involved in showing my new form? You're going to do. I've got two forms, right? There are two classes. What do I need to do for the second form?
First you should, I don't know if you should hide first one, pull the second one.
I like your thinking, but before I even pull up the second one, do we even have the second one yet?
Oh, you have to create an instance.
That's the first step. So the first step is create an instance of the next form, whatever that is, right? Remember we did this? And the next form is called, let's create an instance. We're going to call this the race form, lowercase, right? Is equal to a new race form. We need to do this, right? No object, can't do anything with it. That's number one, okay? So I'm going to the next form. Now, we want to show the next one and hide this one. However, we also want to pass a reference from our current form to the new form. Why do I want to do that? Because, why? Why would I want to pass a reference from our current form to the new form? So I want to kind of create a link from both the forms, yeah. If I want to go back, because does the new form know anything about its parent? No, not easily anyway. All right, so what we need to do that is go into my race form, right? Here's our race form, and I want to create on the coding side of the house, right? So I'm going to go and view the code, which is, you press F7. On the code side, I want to make a property, right? That basically is going to reflect a reference to the previous form. And the previous form reference is going to be based on the ability form. So I'm going to do something like this. So I'm going to go prop. And what it's going to be is we're creating a property, and the property is going to have, it's going to be public. And what we're going to do is we're going to say it's of type ability form, right? Remember this? Tab, tab, right? So if you tab over, if you go into, if I start typing the first part, which is the ability form, right? And then my property is the name that I'm going to call it, which is going to be called previous form or parent form, whatever you want to call it, right? Once I've done this and I've created it as a public property, because ability form and previous form is a reference type and not a value type, right? It doesn't matter how I reference it. I want to create a link back to the previous form, but I got to do that before, as I create this thing. And let me show you what I'm talking about. So it's kind of a little bit backwards. Yeah.
I'm getting underlines on my race form.
Here?
Yeah.
Well, the only way you get that is if you don't have the race form. You should be able to do that.
I see what it meant. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so now what we want to do, the next piece is set or create a reference, set the previous form property, which we created of the next form, this. Right? And the way to do that would be, we say race form dot previous form, which which points to this form. I remember why we did this. We did this because we want to create a link. We're going to say, hey, previous form, when the race form looks at its previous form, it's pointing to this one, which is ability form, right? Now I have the ability to traverse back and forth. If I didn't have that, I would know there is no record of the previous form, unless you use something called parent, which doesn't do it. It's much more convoluted than this. Okay, now I can do what you said. I can go race form dot show, right? And then I want to say this dot hide, right? And we're not closing it, because if I close this form, because this is the originating form for my application, it'll close the application down, right? So we don't want to do that. So I want to show the next form, and then hide this form. That's all the steps you need, right, for moving from one form to the other. We've talked about this a bunch of times. I'm just refreshing your memory. Will this be on the exam, or will there be a question around this on the exam? Absolutely. I'm telling you about it, right? It's going to be on there. I might give you a piece of code and say, what's missing? Choose one of these 4 options, right, to make us go from one form to the other. Okay. On the race form now, this is nice. I've got the ability to track to go to the next form, but I want to be able to go back, right? So if I go to the race form, before we even have any other data, I want to make my back button work. So we'll do it in the reverse now, right? So I'll double click my back button to create a little link for it, which is the event handler that automatically gets generated. And I want to refer back to my previous form. So what do? I'm going to say previous form, and I'll probably use this dot previous form, just to indicate that it's part of our current form, right? Dot show. I'm showing the previous form, and now I'm going to close this, because I don't want to keep this one open, right? Now I could hide it as well. It doesn't really matter, right? It would be catastrophic if you close this and try to open or show the previous one in the reverse order. It may not work, because when you close a form, it shuts down, right? It doesn't kill it, but it kills the instance of the show. Yeah. It would recreate it, so it wouldn't hurt anything if you hit it either. You wouldn't. No, it would kill it, because that instance is tied to. It wouldn't just be floating in like some kind of loose radical that would be sitting there. No, it wouldn't be like a memory leak. It would just replace it. Because remember, what we're doing in ability form, we're recreating this. We're doing it again. Every single time you go there, we create a new instance of the race form, right? But it's called race form, and it's linked to this variable. So whatever was there before, it's wiped out, right? Yes. It does garbage collection for you. Like most modern languages do that, yeah? Yes, yeah. Otherwise, you'd have to, in C++, you'd have to do all your garbage collection on your own. Yes. That's interesting. I don't know what happened. Rich is going to come and help you out. Thank you, Rich. Okay, so let's try this out. So we've got a race button, and let's see if this works, right? So I'm going to kind of run this thing for the first time. Remember that the first form, if I have a problem, it's going to show up. What are the build errors? Show me the build errors. What are the build errors? I know what the build errors are. Because our ability form, right? I have this active visible checkbox. We left it in because of Keith. It's Keith's fault. I got to blame somebody, right? I know that guy, right? I want to get rid of this stuff, right? Now, it's going to break my form. Remember this? If I do this, it might break my form. If I try and do a build, right? Build my solution, it might break my solution. But in this case, it doesn't because I killed the actual checkbox. Let's try it again. Okay, cool. I got this. I want to go roll my abilities. Yay, that works. And if I click next, it should take me to my next form. Now, it's not in the right place. Let's fix that. So we're going to go to my Solution Explorer, and I want to go to Race Form and double click so it opens up. Click on the Race Form, go to Properties, pin it up there, unpin my Solution Explorer. And what I want to do is I want the start location to be different. Now, if I ask you what start position does on an exam, on a little question, what does it do? It tells you where the form originates. And by Windows default location, it's the top left corner of the window. If I say center screen, I can certainly put it in the exact same location as the other one. Okay, so that's the first thing. The other things are, I have a couple of buttons up on the top here that will have no effect. If I click X, what do I really want that to do? If I click the X button, I actually want to cancel. I want to go back, right? That's what I want to do. If I click X, I want to go back. So X and back will do the exact same function in this instance. The other thing is, I don't want to maximize my form on either one. I don't want to be able to go to ability form and maximize my button, and I don't want to go on my race form and maximize my button. In fact, I want them to be that maximize option to be disabled. So if you look at my control box, right? This is for the form itself, not for an item, right? And if I go to look at the control box basically shows whether these things show or not, right? But my maximize box itself is the one that I want to set to false. So I want to set that maximize box to false on both the ability form as well as the race form. Maximize box. There we go. And save. Okay, now let's run this thing again so we can see that it works. So one day with my Visual Studio Response. It's a great time to grab a sip of water. Was that? Listen, I love my computer. My computer knows, right? Computers are my friends, all right? I don't hit the computer. Huh? Oh, that wasn't me. So if I click roll abilities, no problem. If I click next, it goes next. If I click back, it goes back, right? And if I click next again, it keeps going back and forth, no problem. So we've got that connection, the ability for us to move back and forth, right? Okay, I want to choose, you're good? Do you have a question? You're going to do what? If you're going to encourage Keith, is that what you're going to do? Don't encourage Keith. Don't encourage Keith. So let me go back. So we have functionality. We can move from one form to the other now, but we have a problem with the X. If I click the X, its form closing is going to activate. Form closing, when that activates, I want it to close the form. I want it to go back to the previous form by default. Now we had some problems with this before, right? I don't want it to terminate the application, right? I want the only form that terminates the application is the first form. For now, that's ability form. In the future, it might be some other form that's terminating the application. So if I click the X button, it's just going to go back. How do I do that? And what's the right way to do it? Yeah. Oh, I love you. You get the best thing. The method from the back button. Okay, so there's two things you can do. I could trigger the back button. I could do that, right? I could do that. But we have a form closing button because whenever I close this X button, the form closing event triggers, right? So what I want to really do, if I go to the back button, this back button has these two lines. And I want to repeat these two lines. Now, there's only two. If there was a lot more lines, maybe a method would be okay. Could I call the back button this event from another event? Not so sure. And we'll talk about this in a second why. An example of this would be the form closing event for the form itself. So the race form, if I want to get to the form closing event, how do I do it? Exam question. How do I get to the form closing event of my form? Yes. My Solution Explorer. And then from there, where? If I want to go to the form itself, I need to go to properties, right? On the properties, there is the properties as well as the lightning bolt. The lightning bolt's all about the events. These are all the events that are available. And then form closing. Excellent. So I double click the form closing, which generates that stub, right? And what I really want to do, I would love to do is, hey, activate that back button click event. How do I do that? Can I do activate another event from this event? And what does this mean? Look, there is an E already, and it requires two of these parameters, right? The back button, if I call this event from this one, it's going to require a sender and it's going to require an E. Does this E work with this one? And what do all these things mean anyway, right? Well, this one is the form closing event, and the E represents the form closing event itself, right? And this E represents the back button click event, the click event. That's what this E represents. The sender object represents which object you've clicked, generate this event, right? So if this sender object is a different event, do something to try something like this. Back button click, right? I couldn't do this, right? Because I need two parameters. I need to send in something like a sender parameter, right? And an E, right? Now the problem with that is, I'm just putting it out there sometimes, if they're not compatible, like these aren't, right? You may have a problem. Yes. Sorry? We could do that too. I'm just saying, I'm just putting it out there. There's only 2 lines, right? So it's almost like me generating a method. Might as well just type those 2 lines in there. I'll save lines, actually. 2 lines as opposed to like 5 lines for the method, right? So is it the right, if I had 5 lines or 6 lines or 10 lines, it makes sense. I could extract the method, which is this previous form show and this close into a method and call that method from my form closing event. That's what you're saying, right? And call the same one from the back button, right? I love it. That's the way to do it. But what about if I just call the back button itself? Is there a way to do that? That's the question. And if you tried this, let's see what it gives you. First of all, does it build? Build succeeded. Yay. Can it detect that there's a problem? If it doesn't give you an underline, can't detect. But upon use, you may get a different issue altogether. So here's my next button. Yay. Right? I'm going to click the back button. That works. That works. Does it work? What's happening? Exception. And there's a reason why it's happening, because it's triggering both events at the same time. One event is calling the other event over and over again. Remember this problem? We had this problem before, right? What do I mean by that? It's actually this whole idea of the disposal system, the garbage collection that we talked about before. It's not automatic. It gets to the point where it's going in circles. I've created a cyclical reference, right? Why is this happening? Because if you look at the, I'm just going to close this one off for a second, right? If you look at, this is the form designer. If I look at this thing, what is this doing? This is happening on form closing. When I click the back button, what's really happening? I'm closing the form, right? So this calls this one, and this one calls this one, and this one calls this one forever. Yeah.
It works on my.
This?
It's not doing it.
This? Be careful. You may not have a close here. You may have a hide. Check. Right? That's a different thing. Remember we talked about hiding and closing? If I make this hide, that's a different thing that can happen. If I do this, right? And if I press start, and if I go next, and if I go back, I'm good, right? If I go next, and if I hit the X, I go back. And I can use the back button without actually having the back button trigger. I don't have to have another method, right? So next, close it, it goes back, right? Next, creates a new form, back. Next, back, works fine. Only with the hide, not with the show, not with the close. So this is okay. Passing this reference and calling the back button event, this is something we've never done before, would work. Sometimes, I'm just going to put it out there for you, passing in the sender object through to the back button may not work. Just putting it out there, right? If you're going to call another object, sometimes it'll say, I don't know what you're trying to do. You're telling me that the sender is actually the X. That's the sender. In this case, it's true, right? But the event is not a click event. The event is a form closing event, right? Which is a totally different kind of event. So how is it translating? It's figuring it out is what it is. All right, so we can do this thing. And we've done this in a different way before. We were able to go back. I want to generate before we take a break, I want to generate the race form stuff that I talked about. So I want to do, there's two options here. One is I can use a combo box, right? And the other one I can use is a list box. They're very similar, and we'll show the differences in a second. Here's the list box. We'll do the list box first. So I'm putting the list box in there. List box 1, right? I'm going to make this a little bigger here like this. Okay. And you know what? I might as well put a label on the list too. Here's my label, and this list is going to show the race. You know, like pick your race is what this label is going to say. So let's try this out. So I'm going to go Solution Explorer, pin it. I'm going to pin up my properties for a second as well. And in the properties area down here, I'm going to choose, when I click on the label, I'm going to call this something that makes sense, which is going to be called my race label. Okay, and then it should say something like, pick your race. Pick your race. There we go, pick your race. If you notice, there's this little smart arrow right here, right, in the form itself, right? If you click the smart arrow, you can actually use edit items, and I can add all my items manually. Yes?
It's an array.
It's not an array. It's a list. I told you.
No array.
It's a list. There is no array list in C#. It's a list. It's a list of type what? It's a list of strings equivalent, right? So if I click on edit items, I can enter the strings in the collection, 1 per line. It tells you what to do. And for example, let's start adding men. Human, right? That's part of it. Elf, half elf, dwarf, halfling, half orc. That'd be extra races too. Dragonborn. Got some other ones in there to make it more interesting. Half ogre. Right? Whatever. Just making them up, right? All the ones that are available. Some of them aren't available. What else? Tiefling, right? That's the new one, right? What other ones do you like? Huh? What are they called? Okay. I didn't get that, but yes, you could add other ones in there for yourself as well. So now I have all them in there, right? I've added them in. And if I see a representation here in the dropdown, but I also can see that if I go click on the list box, and if I look here, right, here's my list box, and I look down, first of all, the list box 1 doesn't make any sense. Let's rename this thing to race list box. Race list box. Remember, list boxes are on your assignment 3, right? That's why we're talking about them today. Okay, if I scroll down, you see that there's something called items. There's an items property with a collection. If I click on there, you see there's a little ellipses right here. If I click on the ellipses, it brings up the list again. Okay? Okay, that's number 1. 2, I can set the list to sorted, even if I entered it in like I did. If I want to sort the list, I can just choose from false. I can go to true automatically. And now it's sorted. Make sense? All right. Let's see what this thing does when I run it. Yes? You can do more rules as well. But from a property perspective, by default, the control has either a true or false. Either it's sorted in ascending order or not.
So when you're doing the sorted, if you wanted it to, every time you open that form, to have a default label, pick one now or whatever.
Like human
Yeah, okay, sure.
would be the default.
Yeah.
Is there a way of doing that, right? Can I choose it from here? Well, if I click the smart arrow, there isn't any way of making this bound here. That's something we need to do with code. And we're going to do that in a second. So I want to make it almost like the default selection. What can I do to make the selected item, right? And I want you to think about this because it's a list, right? Okay, so true is that's what the one it is. I'm not changing anything here. Here's my value member. What's this? My value member. There's no property here for that yet. We're going to get to that. Visible, is it true or false? And the rest of the controls are properties are almost you've seen before. When we get to databases, data source, we can specify a data source if we want to. So we can pull from a database instead of manually typing this. Like we're just hardwiring it in, right? Like typing it in. This is like the standard. But what if we had it linked to a database and you know what? In the next version of D&D or whatever, we added other races we can add, you can access. All right, so let's leave this the way it is and let's try it out and see if it works. And what behavior it gives us. So I roll abilities, click next, and now I choose Dragonborn. But there isn't anything by default selected. Okay, click this and then click this and we're done, right? Okay, here's something else. What if I expand this, right? As I expand, I see more and more items that are available to me for selection. So and if I go the other way, you can see that it goes right down to this. So I can have one, or I can have more than one item. Notice that the scroll bar is automatic. These are all properties of my list box, right? And it also has one way of looking. The list box has one mode, if you will, right now. Notice that there's a border style that's fixed 3D. That's an option. Or you can say fixed single if you wanted to go a little flatter style, right? Okay. And notice that as we go through, it's again very similar controls that we've seen before. Okay. Now Keith was asking, what happens? Can I make it so that when my form loads, that's what I want. So let's listen to what I'm saying. On form load, I want to select a specific object or item in my list. How do I do that? Let's see. So I'm going to click dwarf and I can't click anything. The selection, the collection. Okay, let's try it out. So I'm going to go collection and I'm going to go, okay, so half human and then press OK. The form itself? This? Yeah, and then do what? That double clicking causes an event to occur, right? Double clicking doesn't actually get me in there. Double clicking, all it does is it generates the event. I love your thinking though. I like it, right? But no, it doesn't do that. So I want to make it so on form load, going back to that, on form load, I want it so that I have a default check, a default item that's checked. How do I do that, right? Double click on the form. It generates the form load event, all right? So when the form is loaded, I want the race list box, right? I want to do something with the race list box. Let's do that. So race, if I start typing race list box, one day when my Visual Studio wants to respond, right? Race list box. And one of the things I can do with race list box, I can press dot. I can say show. I can say sorted. All the same things we had before in our list, we can do that. But there's additional things we can do here with our race list box, right? For example, I want to select an item, right? I want to select an item here. Can I choose select? Well, here's select. Here's selected index. Here's selected item, right? So if I start typing select, you can see that these are options that I have for select. Properties are the wrenches, right? Lightning bolt is the events. Little boxes like this are the methods, all right? So I want to select. I want to make a select method, and I want to select something, right? Select actually says select the control, so that's not it, right? There's also item. If I go item, so if I want to look at a particular item, I can say items, right? Dot, and I have options for the items, right? So I can look at get type equals the number of items or whatever. But how do I specifically select an item that I want in the list? Huh? Sorry? Value member? So race list box dot value member. Okay. If I hover over it, says gets or sets the path of the property to use as the actual value for the items in the list control. That would wipe out the list. Yeah. Selected item. Okay. I could do that too. Let's try that out. Selected item. Selected item. Okay. And if I hover over that, it says get or sets the currently selected item in the list box. Okay. So I could do that. Right. So I can do that. That means it's a property, and I can do something like human. Now, if it exists in the list, it will work, right? Let's see if that's true. So on load, yes. Set selected. I'll go back to that in a second. Let's see if this works. Selected item is equal to human. Let's see if that works. Right. If I do it, then if I go next, human. Right. But only if it exists. What if it doesn't exist? Yeah. The first item, that would be the first item. Selected index is equal to 0. That's something we can do as well. But in our case, we've sorted the list, and human was the first item in the list, but now it's down in here. So that's by default what it is. Okay? Okay, this is good. We want to select a default because if we don't select something, and if I click next, right, I'm not going to have a race. That's bad. So I want to kind of make it so that there's a default selection. Okay, now here's what I want to do next, and then we'll stop. Whatever item I've selected, I want to put it into a list control, sorry, a text box control over here, right? So pick your race, and then race selected will be the label and with the text box right here. Let's do that. So click X, and let's programming it in. So nice and small, right? We need a label, and we need a text box. So let's do the text box. There's our text box. Yay. Okay, in our text box, we want the race that we selected over here. We pick your race. And just to make this a little bit, from a UI perspective, that's not what I wanted to do, but I'll fix that. From a UI perspective, what I want to do is move this down a little bit. So this is the race selected, so that it's not in the same level. And we'll show you that why in a second. So I click on this one. This will be the race selected label. Race selected label, nice and long. And we'll call this race selected. That'll be the actual text of the label, race selected. And then this one will be the race selected text box, right? Race selected text box. Text box. My fat fingers. Text box. There we go. Okay, so we got this thing. So I want the race selected text box dot text to be equal to whatever I've selected. And I want to do that on selected index changed. Nice and easy, right? Let's try it out. So how do I do it? I'm going to go back to your double clicking now, right? If I double click on my list, I get this, race list box selected index changed. I also have a couple of additional, by accident, event handlers that I created. What happened? How do I get rid of them safely? Yes. Yes. And what I want to do is I want to go here, show me, the lightning bolts. And this is okay, but there's some other ones I made by accident, right? Like, yeah, well, if you want to do this one. So this one's one, and then this one's the other one, right? There's this one. We want to do the, and this, by the way, these are the default event handlers that get selected, right? Whenever you double click, it's the default one. And every kind of control has a different default event handler that gets generated. Okay, so going back to this one. This is the one I want. Race list box selected index change. So when that happens, when the race list box is changed, what do I want to happen? I want the race list box itself, whatever the selected item is, I want it to go into the race list box itself, or the selected race text box. So what I mean by that is the selected race, is that, they call it selected race or race, what do they call it? Race selected.
You can see the object in your C#.
Yeah, I just can't remember what it is. You're talking about here in the pull down.
Drop down,
Yeah.
show you all the objects.
Here, we're talking about now, or here, sorry, here. Race list box, race form, race selected text box. That's what it is. Race selected text box. Thank you. Race selected text box text is equal to, I want to point to the race list box, right? Dot what? I want to have the item that's been selected, right? How do I choose that? Okay, let's try that. So selected item, right? Because I can read, like it says, I can read, or I can get or set that item. It's a getter and setter, right? That's good, right? Dot toString, right? Okay, so selected item, dot toString. Do I need the toString? If I just do this, what if I just do this? Is that okay? No? Why? Because if I hover over selected item, what does it return? An object, right? So it's not that. I want the selected item, whatever it is, toString to be sent back. Let's try this out and see what happens. So run. And it should run automatically, right? If I click next, human. Yeah. We don't want to have anything not clicked. We want to always have something clicked. So if I click half elf, it changes. Half ogre, it changes. If I scroll up and choose elf, it changes. Anytime we choose anything now, it changes. Okay? Is that clear for everybody? Did I lose anybody with what I just did? Let's go back, right? So first, when the form loads, we use the selected item property of the race list box. Every list box have a selected item property if it's been selected at all. And we can set it or get it. It's a getter setter. Like it says right here, if you hover over it, says gets or sets the currently selected item in the list box. Now, the question you might have is, what if that item doesn't exist? Does it create it for you, right? That's the question. And the answer is probably going to be no, right? It's going to give you an error, like a null reference error, number one. Two, right? If this is setting the item, the selected item, this is getting the selected item, right? So I'm using the getter. I'm using the setter, right? Here I'm using the getter, but when it returns an item, it returns an object, and I got to convert it to string, right? Otherwise, you're going to get some weird, it won't work properly, right? And we're going to set that equal to whatever the item that's selected. We're going to assign to my race selected text box dot text property. That's what's happening. Very simple. Okay, let's take a short break. When we come back, what I want to do is I want to take that race and pump it into the class that is the character class, so that when I go back and forth, it remembers. Okay?